coming, and we have all noted that it's a really great, diverse group of people today, and a very full room. So Ben's outlined that the City Circle obviously keen on having open and honest debate, and certainly we've had a lot of interest in this evening's discussion. We've also been asked about the composition of the panel and other questions. You can't please everybody all of the time, but we see this as part of an ongoing dialogue. And as I discussed with the panellists, we don't want this just simply to be another talking point. There will be a follow-up to this. We will be liaising with interested parties with a write-up and see if there's any way that we can work constructively in a positive way to move things forward. So the panellists will all have their own independent views and thoughts. And whilst we're here to discuss prevent, it's always useful to see things in a holistic and contextual manner. So for that reason, the first speaker we have today is Max Hill, QC. I'm going to introduce the speakers just prior to each of them speaking, so that it doesn't get lost with one talk after the other. The speakers are going to be speaking for about 10 minutes or so each. I'd ask you all to keep your questions to the end, after the last speaker has spoken. And we are aware there are diverging views, but as with all open and honest debate, mutual respect is always key. And we have ways of dealing with people if we think that's... Oh, and by the way, please make sure your phones are off, because it's really annoying when that happens. I've turned mine off now. So I'm going to introduce you firstly to Max Hill, QC. Max is the recently appointed, as of 1st of March 2017, independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. Now, one might think independent review of legislation, prevent programme, policy and legislation all feed into one another. So it's quite important, and not everybody is always fully aware of what the independent reviewer does. So Max is going to give us an outline of his role. Max is the current head of chambers at 18 Red Lion Court. He's also the leader of the South Eastern Circuit of the Bar from 2014 to 2016. He's the chairman of the Calisham Trust, bencher of Middle Temple, and former chairman of the Criminal Bar Association. Despite his youthful looks, he was called in 1987, and he's also a recorder. He's also a former chairman of trustees and current patron of London's children's charity Seen and Heard. And just so he doesn't get bored, he's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. So Max is going to give us an outline. I'm not going to refer to the work in that area, because Max is going to cover that himself. So thank you, Max. Thank
you very much. Good evening, and thank you to all the organisers for inviting me here. Can I start by telling you, as I think has already been hinted, I have been an independent self-employed barrister for 30 years and nothing has changed. I have not become a minister, nor a Home Office official, nor a civil servant overnight on the 1st of March. I have no contract of employment with the government, the Home Office, or any other ministry. I remain an independent lawyer and a QC. The essentials of my role, for those who don't know, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation scrutinises the operation of the UK's counter-terrorism laws and reports findings and recommendations to the Home Secretary. Those reports are laid before Parliament without exception, and they inform public debate on key counter-terrorism issues. The reports are often cited in legal cases, particularly on appeal, by parliamentarians and the media, and recommendations have in the past been influential on government policy and operational practice. So my role is to monitor UK counter-terrorism legislation for its fairness, its effectiveness and its proportionality. The essence of independent review lies in the combination of three concepts which are not often seen together. Firstly, complete independence from government. Secondly, unrestricted access to classified documents and national security personnel. And thirdly, a statutory obligation on government to lay my reports before Parliament on receipt. So that's the role. The next thing I wanted to mark is the single most significant event during my short 7 weeks as independent reviewer, namely the Westminster attack amounting to multiple murder by one individual. Can I make the following brief points about this horrific act? And there are 7 brief points. Firstly, commenting too early about a terrorist incident is usually a mistake. I did not do so. I restricted myself to a tweet and a single website post. I shall do my best not to be drawn into knee-jerk reaction to any future events, and I have not yet commented at all on what happened in Whitehall yesterday, or indeed in Willesden yesterday. Secondly, that first point is made good by 2 simple facts. So-called Islamic State claimed the attacker, Massoud, as one of their own within 24 hours of what he did. But it turns out, as far as I can see, that they thought he was someone else, and they were wrong. The other individual, who they apparently confused him with, was Trevor Brooks, as he used to be known, and some of the media, some of the mainstream media, made the same mistake. Indeed, I think Channel 4 is amongst those who made that mistake. Secondly, some commentators chose to use the attack as evidence against UK immigration policy until, of course, it was revealed that Massoud was born in this country. That is another serious mistake which should have been avoided. Third point, had he survived, in my view, Massoud would have been charged with 5 counts of murder and many more counts of attempted murder, and that would have been the indictment against him. In other words, prosecutors would have been unlikely to have needed the provisions of the Terrorism Acts in that case. Fourthly, that means that there should not be any call for more terrorism offences in the wake of such an attack. And I'd be pleased to see that there's little, if any, lobbying to that effect. Fifthly, whilst resisting hasty comment in all other areas, there is a need for greater vigilance and efforts, particularly in the area of social media and online messaging. And it is good to know that social media companies are setting up, as I understand it, a joint database for the removal of extremist materials. This is a much needed initiative. I hope it will prove valuable. Creative solutions to the serious problem, and it is a serious problem, of extremist material and online propaganda do need to be found, but found without trampling upon fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech for all. We must, all of us, walk the line between freedom to express views which do not break our laws and going so far that criminal offences are committed and action must be taken. Sixth, on Westminster, those who waited before commenting were able to see an efficient and timely investigation by the police and others, leading to the conclusion, as we now know, that Massoud acted alone. Worrying though that is, the fact that he acted at all, and it represents an alarming facet of the threat that we face in this country at this time, it plainly does not call for any form of crackdown on communities around Britain. A more sophisticated approach is clearly needed. Seventh, and finally on Westminster for now, we should be grateful to note that the national threat level, which remains at severe, was not raised to critical at any stage, either during or after the Westminster attack. This tells us that cool and calm heads were applied from the outset, and we should be grateful to our police and intelligence services for what they do. Those are the 7 points on Westminster. They all beg the question how to prevent future attacks. I understand, of course, that is a big question for tonight. And I remind you if you do not already know, that strictly speaking, Prevent is outside my remit as independent reviewer. I am not the reviewer of Prevent. Indeed, there is no reviewer of Prevent. That means this evening that you should neither expect me to speak for the Home Office about Prevent, which is not my job, nor to speak against it. I am, however, here to listen to others' views, and I can promise nothing more than that. That said, by way of introduction, it may be worthwhile calling to mind the Joint Committee on Human Rights Counter Extremism report for July 2016, at the end of the second parliamentary session of this government. I've lit on that as an introductory document tonight because I was booked to give evidence before the Joint Committee, sitting together with the Home Affairs Select Committee next Wednesday, the 3rd of May, and therefore this event is extremely timely. This report, the second session report from July 2016, was going to be part of the agenda for that event. Sadly, however, it's been postponed because of the general election and the dissolution of Parliament, so there's nothing I can do about that. Nonetheless, I can remind you of some of the conclusions and recommendations which were tabled before Parliament by the JCHR last July, at which time the political agenda included not only Prevent, but also the prospect of a Counter Extremism Bill, which isn't quite the topic of tonight's discussion, and we've in fact seen no recent sign of any Counter Extremism Bill. I thought to remind you of some of the conclusions and recommendations of the Joint Committee on the basis that it was penned by a cross-party group of both peers and MPs. I thin it down though because some of their recommendations don't relate to, nor do they mention Prevent, so I only select those which do. At paragraph 42 you will find this: any new bill on countering extremism should draw on all the available evidence. Those preparing the bill should consider the experience of the Prevent strategy, that's why I mention it tonight, and the operation of the Prevent duty. An independent review of the Prevent strategy and duty should be published as part of the consultation on the bill. The current oversight arrangements for Prevent are too opaque and do not engender confidence. It's not clear to us, said the authors of the report, why the government does not currently regard the Prevent strategy as being part of the background to its proposed bill. Next, at paragraph 50, they say this: it's too early, this is July 2016, it is too early to reach any definitive conclusions on the success of the Prevent duty in schools. Anecdotal evidence suggests that there may be some cause for concern about the impact of the duty, and the government will be well advised to ensure that referrals are made in a sensible and proportionate fashion. However, we also accept that it's very easy for dangerous myths to be spread about Prevent. The only way for these to be dispelled is for there to be rigorous and transparent reporting about the operation of the Prevent duty. As to a university context, they went on to say this, it's paragraph 62, any proposed legislation will have to tread carefully in an area where there's already considerable uncertainty. For example, in the university context, it's arguable whether the expression of certain views constitutes putting forward new ideas in the form of controversial and unpopular opinions, or whether it amounts to vocal and active opposition to the UK's fundamental values. The potentially conflicting duties on universities to promote free speech whilst precluding the expression of extremist views is likely to continue to cause confusion. So that's as to schools, and I'm sure we'll hear more from Kevin in particular later on those issues. As to more broader aspects of harm, I just give you this conclusion. It's paragraph 74, reads as follows: the need to safeguard children from neglect, physical harm and sexual abuse is well understood, but it's rather less clear how one can draw a line between religious freedom and requirements for safeguarding that genuinely protect children. While there may be some argument for safeguarding measures to be introduced in out-of-school settings, these should not be specifically aimed at religious activities, nor are we convinced that existing safeguarding measures are inadequate in this regard. Any new measures should be proportionate, focused, and should only apply where identifiable concerns about the safety or well-being of children and young persons have been raised within a particular institution. We do not support a regime of routine inspections of out-of-school settings. We're aware of the very grave concerns around government proposals for a regime of compulsory registration, and we reserve the right to return to this issue, etc. And finally, at paragraph 75, the government should listen with particular attention to those who would be expected to apply for and enforce these orders, such as the police, educational establishments and councils, and Muslim or other faith communities. So those were some of the potted recommendations that may spark thought and debate this evening. I am, may I remind you, at this time non-partisan in relation to prevent and indeed counter extremism, neither of which are directly engaged by the statutes which I review. However, it would be foolish, and I recognise this after only 7 weeks, to ignore the indirect impact of these issues. So I hope that this reminder serves to promote discussion this evening. Finally, for me from now, I turn, if I may, to the efforts that I am making to fill in the many gaps in my own knowledge and experience by taking soundings from those parts of society who are affected by the legislation which I must now review. I do want to hear from all who have a view. That is why I accepted the kind invitation for me to participate this evening. And for your information, my new contacts over the past few weeks already include, just give you some examples in no particular order, the Voice of Islam Radio, serving the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, as many of you will know. Forward Thinking, the Open Society Justice Initiative, whose publication in Rhodium Trust I've received and read. The Anglo-Israel Association, Faith Matters and Tel Mama, and the Muslim Council of Britain. I do hope to make many more contacts very soon. I shall be in Leicester meeting Muslim community leaders next week. I shall be in Bradford the week after, and I hope that that list will lengthen, perhaps with help from some of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max. That was really instructive and helpful. So our next speaker, Hashim Mohammed, is a barrister at number 5 Chambers, and I know Max considers himself very fortunate to have inherited him, as it were.
Not literally.
Hashi was a special advisor to the previous independent review of terrorism legislation, David Anderson QC, and very kindly agreed to continue in that role. So Max has some continuity in terms of special advisor. So Hashi practices public law and human rights, and also presents documentaries on BBC Radio 4, including on terrorism and how nations react and social mobility in Britain. So I'll hand over to Hashim now to tell us a little bit more about his role.
Thank you very much. I propose to take my remarks in 3 parts. First, to just explain what my role means in terms of working with Max now and David before. Then I want to just sort of touch upon the context in which we meet now in terms of the climate, as Max did in some ways. And then thirdly, just some thoughts about prevent, which is something that we've been talking about, and I'm sure many of you are here to discuss. Max's role, as he has explained, is a statutory role in which he's an independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, there to report to Parliament and to check the proportionality and the applicability of terrorism legislation. In that role, he's assisted by 3 special advisors, of which I'm one. And my role is, as somebody who works closely with him, security cleared, is there to assist him to do his job more effectively. And some of that involves coming to events such as these, assisting him with his report, and also understanding the kind of context and the way in which some of this is taking place at the moment, and crucially also to act as continuity from what David was doing to what he will be doing now. Now, the crucial part as well that often is very rarely understood, still less really appreciated, is the extent to which the police and the security services can only really be effective if they have the full confidence of the community behind them, without which they're unable to do their jobs, without which they will be lacking vital components of what they are trying to achieve. An example on the situation that we're now learning in Willesden, for example, that this was an intelligence-led project in which the community and family members of the alleged people were informing the security services and assisting them in their work. And that can only happen if the confidence of the community is maintained. And I will touch upon that and as to the climate in which we meet again, and how the issue of prevent is often conflated with terrorism legislation and the works of the security services, because of course, as many of you will understand, prevent is only one part of the government's overall picture of what's often referred to as contest. And that is also important because I also know that we're far more effective and doing a much better job than in a place like France or in a place like Belgium, in the sense that actually communities are much more cooperative, and an example of that being so many of you having turned up today on a Friday evening because you have a clear interest in this subject and I'm sure have some thoughts on how we can do things better. So in terms of now prevent, as Max has explained in his role and as well as my role in assisting him, we're neither here to defend the issue of prevent because it's a policy product, nor is it something that we're here to bash. But what I am here to do is reflect upon the last few years in which I worked with David, travelling around the country and hearing a lot about prevent, and I would proffer a few thoughts about how it's working and what the concerns are about, as a form of trying to engage in a debate, in trying to find common ground perhaps. For example, in the email that was sent out by Ismet, she says in that email, "We would like to move this forward from a binary polarized discussion to a clear understanding and assessment of what can be improved." And I'm a strong believer of that, because at the heart of what prevent seeks to achieve ultimately is a pursuit to ensure that we find a way in which those people who might be vulnerable in going down the path that they should not go down, and how we can help them, help the families, and help the authorities from taking them away from that path. Now, as an overview picture of what that means, I find it hard to engage with anyone who disagrees with that basic premise. Now, the practicalities of how that applies itself, whether you are conflating conservatism with terrorism, whether you are getting rid of safe spaces in schools and making it more toxic to be able to have any conversations, whether teachers are badly trained, not trained, and are finding it difficult to understand what they should be doing, whether you're making it more difficult for teachers to have conversations that they would otherwise have been able to have, but for the context of what prevent means today. These are all legitimate conversations to be had, and you cannot be in a position where you say, actually, no, that's not a legitimate conversation to be had. So that, for me, is where the debate is, and that's where we should be trying to find a way in which we can genuinely find common ground with a view to just getting to a place where we all have that common purpose, which is to try and assist parents, teachers, and authorities to steer vulnerable individuals away from places that they should not be. There are what I consider to be often legitimate concerns about prevent, which is just what I've outlined, and illegitimate concerns about prevent from those who might, for example, for ideological reasons, or other kind of unexplained or secret reasons, whatever there may be, who are completely opposed to Prevent in any form whatsoever. And that, again, it's a free country, you're entitled to have your view, and that's not something that I'm really here to address or engage with. Then, of course, we've got the schools, as I've said, an example, and universities. I was speaking at a school in which I was going to talk about social mobility, and I had to fill out a whole form to explain what exactly I was going to say, who I was affiliated to, what my agenda was, and all sorts of things that I just, for the last 15 years, I've been going in and out of schools talking to kids about aspiration and doing well and all the rest of it. And I've seen a massive sea change personally in the past 2 to 3 years, which I think has made it difficult for schools to be able to do things in the way that they might necessarily want to do things. So that's, for example, something that I'm seeing on the ground. And then finally, another example of something I'm seeing on the ground of it working, and I will shame them or praise them in public, which is the work that I've seen with Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea, where I was invited to see their work on Prevent. And that for me was an example. They have a meeting once a month in which they invite everybody in the community who are stakeholders to come and discuss the issues about Prevent both in schools and outside of schools. They invite people to engage, to air their grievances. Some people don't mince their words, other people don't necessarily hold back. And it's an example that's been going on for the last 5 years, in which they have engaged with head teachers, they have engaged with counsellors, they have engaged with parents, they have engaged with local community activists, because they have found that common ground that everybody agrees we're trying to work together in a relatively difficult area, but we have that common purpose, that common drive and determination to help those vulnerable people away from difficult places. And that is an example of it potentially working. And we should try and find a way of replicating that, and trying to find a way in which, for example, if the government is prepared to listen, to take a step back from certain areas in order to try and find that common ground. Now, finally, there is also the problem I often think about, which is that what David Anderson said before about Prevent was that it's created a climate in which a lot of the community believes that they are being spied upon. And that it's created a climate in which a lot of the communities believe that they are being unfairly targeted. Now, you might say that that's not true, but that's a legitimately held view from people in the community, and that's how people feel. Now, think about this for a moment. If that's how the community feels, and that is a genuine belief that people are feeling on the ground, I might necessarily not agree with that, but that also has an impact on the authorities and the work that they need to do to be effective, because ultimately our security services can only be effective if they have the full cooperation of the communities. And if this climate gets hold in a way that is toxic and unhelpful, then that well of good faith and goodwill will dry up, and potentially so will the vital intelligence which comes our way to be able to assist by keeping people safe. And that's just a thought that I thought I would end with. But ultimately, we have to look at the North Star to see where we're trying to get to, and somehow in the middle on our way there, we'll have to find the best way of getting there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hashi. So it's been very useful to obtain an overview and a context within which Prevent, which is just part of the overall strategy, as Hashi has highlighted, works. What we're going to do now is going to drill down a little bit more into its practice, and we're going to start with Kevin. I'm sorry, we've now sat out of turn, but that's fine. So Kevin Courtney has over 34 years experience in education. and has been active in the National Union of Teachers for over 26 years. Having been a Deputy General Secretary for over 6 years, he is now the General Secretary of the NUT, a job which keeps him incredibly busy because he's going from one conference this week to another conference tomorrow. Nobody told him it was a bank holiday weekend. So Kevin has been very active in addressing concerns teachers have about pay and conditions, maternity, anti-racism, LGBT rights. So he's got a very holistic take on the demands on the teaching profession, and one of those demands is the PREVENT strategy. So Kevin's going to talk to us a little bit about that and his views on that. So if I can pass over to you, Kevin, thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, really pleased to be here tonight, and very grateful to the Association of Muslim Lawyers and ISMET for the invitation. I think it's absolutely vital that this issue is talked about in public, and we shouldn't be afraid to discuss this vital topic. My union wants to engage on this. We've had round tables in our headquarters where we've had PREVENT practitioners, PREVENT critics, Ofsted inspectors in the room. We didn't have Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea PREVENT practitioners, but we had some PREVENT practitioners from Tower Hamlets, where we think there's also good work going on, some good practice going on there. I've recently met with Lord Nash, who is a minister in the Education Department. Obviously, Lord Nash is an unelected minister, about the PREVENT area, and we've discussed our different positions, and we were going to accept an article from Lord Nash to be in our magazine, the teacher of our union. He's unfortunately had to withdraw it because of the election. But we're engaging, we're talking to people. People from our union have recently been meeting with Conservative MP Lucy Allen, who was putting down an early day motion, looking for a bill to try and remove PREVENT from primary schools, because she shares some of the concerns that we have. So we do have concerns, but I think it's really important to outline a general sort of position. I think, my union thinks, that teachers are under a moral obligation, which is stronger than a legal obligation or a legal duty. Teachers are under a moral obligation to do everything they can to stop children in their charge being groomed, whether by paedophiles, people who want to steal from them, or by the death cult that calls itself Islamic State. Teachers are under a moral obligation to do everything they can to prevent that. But we think that that happens, when it happens, in the minority of cases where it happens, it's much more like it happens on Facebook, in children's bedrooms. It doesn't happen in school. So the question of how teachers can best fulfill that moral obligation, we think, is by being teachers, by encouraging discussion about the world in their classrooms, not by being some sort of second-tier police force. We think our skills are in teaching and in encouraging discussion, and our concern is that the PREVENT duty, or perhaps the fear of the PREVENT duty as well as the PREVENT duty, because sometimes there is a fear that operates around it. We worry that that's stopping the discussions that need to happen, that it's making those discussions harder to have. And I'll give you just one example of that from a teacher that I know very well and I've spoken to extensively about this particular example. A fortnight after the Charlie Hebdo atrocity, this teacher is a teacher in a secondary school, a girls' secondary school in East London. It's a state school, but the kids there are mainly Muslim girls. And she has a very good relationship. She's not Muslim herself. She's got a very good relationship with her class. And on a weekly basis, they have a session on the school timetable where they discuss items in the news. And she gets the girls to lead off, and they go through the items in the news and they get the girls' opinions on them. And so it's a week or a fortnight after Charlie Hebdo, there is nothing else on the news. And they go through item after item, and none of the girls will put up Charlie Hebdo to be the thing that is discussed. She doesn't press them on it, so they discuss whatever else the girls have found in the news to discuss. After the lesson, she talks with one of the girls that she's got particularly a strong relationship with, and says, what's going on? Why wouldn't it's the only thing on the news, why haven't people discussed it? And the young woman said that their mothers have told them, don't say anything. If you say anything, you'll be put on a list. We'll get reports. So they weren't discussing it because they were frightened. So my friend, the teacher, then asked the young woman what she thought people would have said. And the young woman said, the schoolgirl said, None of them would have said they supported the Charlie Hebdo atrocity. None of them would have supported the terrorists. But some of them would have said things like, I think it should be illegal to draw a cartoon of the Prophet. Or some of them would have said things like, it shouldn't be illegal, but people shouldn't do it anyway. And there would have been things that people wanted to say that weren't said. And so there's no space, therefore. And that may not be prevent, it may be fear of prevent, because this teacher, my friend, would not have reported any of the girls for things that they said around that. So prevent wasn't, in some senses, wasn't the thing, it was fear of prevent, but fear of prevent is very real, I think. And that is stopping us having those discussions, and it seems to me, that potentially makes the situation worse. It means if children aren't discussing in school, then they are discussing out of school. They're discussing away from their teachers, where they're discussing away from a generalised discussion. I think potentially that makes some children more vulnerable to being groomed by the death cult. So we do think this is an important issue that we have to get right. The concerns that we have that lead to the problems are something to do with the overall climate. The fact that Michael Gove, who was the Secretary of State when Prevent Duty came in, had published a book called Fahrenheit 7/7 about the terrorist atrocity on the 7th, I can't remember which year that was, but, and was talking about draining the swamp. So he was explicitly drawing a link between conservative Muslim practice and violent extremism. He's the Secretary of State for Education. I think that creates a climate which makes everything difficult. The training has been dreadful. The government has, as part of its academisation agenda, partly, everything is split up. So there is no accredited national system of training for Prevent. So Prevent happens by little companies that set up, and we hear stories of teachers who tell me that they were told that something to look for in a boy, which might be a sign that he's going down the wrong path, is if he starts growing his beard out. That if he starts, if practice becomes more orthodox, or if a child starts going to mosque more often, if a child's behaviour is starting to change, and I wonder whether they've ever met any teenagers if they think that people's behaviour changing. I mean, I gave my life to Jesus when I was 16, and it was a huge expression of I'm no longer a believer. But you know, children do these things, and it doesn't have, I don't believe anybody can say that it's got those correspondences. Then there is the other problem in schools that we have. That is I don't know how specific it is to schools, we'll hear about the health service, but there is a huge culture of compliance in schools. There is a fear of Ofsted, whether that's real or misplaced. People are frightened and they over-fulfill things. So we know that Ofsted, because we had the Ofsted guy, Sean Harford, who came to our round table. Ofsted, slightly off the Prevent topic, but on British values, you have to teach British values. Ofsted do not require any school to have something explicitly called British values. But some schools, one school, there are other schools that I could point to other things, but one school has the British national anthem, which opens when you touch the school's website, in order that they can demonstrate that they've got British values. Now, this is an over-fulfilment, but it's a problem that we've got. There are... I spoke with this young man, a really wonderful young man, Rahman Mohammadi from Luton Sixth Form College, who was extremely convincing in his conversation with me, where he was collecting for a Palestinian charity. It was a legitimate Palestinian charity, and the head teacher at Sixth Form College told him that he shouldn't be doing this. The police interviewed him, the police went to his home, the police decided when he told them that he was Shia, they said, oh, it's not a problem then, you're not Sunni, so it's okay. So you know, the questions tied up in this, I think, are, if we're telling young people that to be active around the issue of Palestine makes you an extremist or something that should be reported, then that is a very worrying situation. If children can't talk about it in school and then they're getting those messages, that worries me. There is a duty, there's not a duty to report, but there is a duty to have regard, and teachers over-fulfill it. And so there are examples, and sometimes the Home Office or the DFE will say that these are exaggerations. But a school in Bedford recently kept behind two young, they're not Muslim boys, they're ethnic minority boys, brown, their skin is brown, their skin is the same colour that many Muslims have their skin colour, and they kept them behind to talk to the police because these boys had said they had guns, plastic guns. The school knew they were plastic guns, and it wasn't a prevent referral, so the Home Office and the DFE say this isn't a prevent story. This school had had prevent training the week before. The school says that they did this, they kept these children behind because the children had said that they were now speaking Arabic and going to mosque. When it was looked into, the children know no Arabic, they aren't going to mosque. Their dad is a non-practicing British Muslim, their mum is a non-practicing British Sikh. No white child would have been reported in these circumstances. So the school, I think we could just be really hard on the teachers in that school. And I think there is something worrying about teachers that are reported in those circumstances. But you also have to understand the context in which they think they're operating. And if we are going to do something serious about keeping children safe, we have to have discussion going on in schools. We're going to need to train a lot of teachers in that. I don't think that you can just do that easily with every teacher, because I think that if you have a discussion with a group of teenagers, then some children will tell you that the problem with terrorism is Western foreign policy. Some of them will tell you that the Americans are the biggest terrorists in the world. And these things are legitimate points of view for children to hold, and some teachers would be frightened of hearing them. So we would have to train teachers well, so they know that there's an acceptable range of, that there's a range of discussion that you have to understand and work with and live with and be part of. And so prevent, I think, is not helping that situation. We need to keep children safe. I don't think prevent is keeping children safe. If we have to have it, then there has to be much better training. It has to be nationally accredited. But I think we'd be better off removing it, replacing it with the safeguarding duty that teachers better understand, where they do report children, where they think there is a danger, that they're being hurt by their parents, that they're subject to paedophile grooming. That's the duty that we should be expecting teachers to follow through on. That safeguarding duty is where I think we should be. And then working as hard as we can to build those discussions and to allow children to discuss about the world. So ideas are put up, challenged by their peers, challenged by their teachers, and discussion is the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And moving on to, lastly, but not of course least, to our final speaker, Derek Summerfield. I asked for short bios, and Derek Summerfield sent very teasing headlines. Derek is a consultant psychiatrist at the South London and Maudley NHS Trust. He's also honorary senior lecturer at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience, King's College. He's an honourable fellow of the Egyptian Psychiatric Association, former research associate, Refugee Studies Centre at the University of Oxford, formerly a consultant at Oxfam UK, and formerly principal psychiatrist to the Medical Foundation for Victims of Torture. So, as I say, interesting headlines with a wealth of experience underpinning that. So, without further ado, I will hear from Derek in relation to his views on preventing the health sector.
Thank you. 10 minutes isn't very long, but we'll do our best. The most comprehensive and exemplary piece of scholarship which looks at what Prevent is doing in the health and education sectors is this book. This is the report of the Open Society Foundation, a lawyer called Amrit Singh. This was launched in the House of Commons last November. A number of us were interviewed for it. Kevin spoke. And I'll read the executive summary at the end if I have time. There are just 7 points. So I'm speaking as a doctor, but I'm speaking in 2 domains. One, if you like, medical ethics, the ethics of the relationship with the patient. And the other, a wider domain, civil liberties, where the doctor is a sentient, empowered citizen, attentive to a wider issue of rights and socio-political causes of distress and disease. As far as I know, I'm the only doctor in the country who has been writing in academic journals comprehensively rejecting Prevent, and I have been canvassing for other doctors not to do the training. which, as you know, is being mandatory now for a year or more. I think it's an utter corrosion of the doctor-patient relationship. It is a deviation towards spying. It's about scapegoating and spying. It's about Muslims. This is an MI5 program. Once doctors start to work for a spy program, they have crossed a line. They have crossed a line, and there's no ducking it. Interestingly enough, Amrit Singh in this pointed out that to date, the whole question of prevent has gone further in the UK than even in the US. The US made it clear that they were not interested in non-violent extremism. In Britain, apparently, we are interested in that, thought crimes, speech crimes, and the like. My own specialty, psychiatry, might be one where there may be some hopes of having particular access to the mindset and background feelings of patients. Yeah? There are forensic psychiatrists who are now cooperating with Prevent on the grounds that, well, it's like other kind of, forensic psychiatry is psychiatry of criminality, whatever, and the Prevent stuff is carefully use the language of risk and safeguarding, kind of medical type language, vulnerable. This is spying. It is spying. There is no, historically, there's been no relationship between the vast majority of terroristic violence and mental disorder. None at all. Why don't we think about, well, I'll come back to that. And this, there are perfectly ordinary means by which people who were considered liable to commit acts of violence would be handled in the ordinary way. In the ordinary way. Open society is not a forensic clinic. A line has been drawn. This is not ordinary medical work. When it comes to the question of mental disorder, which much is being made of, most of the terroristic violence in the world is committed by state actors, anyway, not lone individuals. Many of those state actors are Western actors, as we know. Why is it that we're not worrying about the mental state of a US drone operator who pushes a button to kill someone selected by algorithm? Or the mindset, the mental stability of Tony Blair, who took us into war? Or why do we think about that? Why do we think about the mindset of members of the cabinet here who supported rendition for torture? Yeah. Yes. One of the responses to some of my papers had come from Northern Ireland, where consultant psychiatrists there have said there's absolutely, in the whole of the troubles in Northern Ireland, 3,000 deaths from the late 60s to the late 90s. There was no contribution whatsoever made by mental disorder to the terroristic violence committed by both sides. The forensic psychiatrists have been playing with a kind of algorithm that they think that they might capture. There's certain characteristics. These things are ridiculous. They have no basis in science. It's just another way. They are breaches of confidentiality. They're just another way of spying. I was sitting on the Royal College of Psychiatry, whom I prodded into having at least a working party on this group. And you can see how doctors use instrumental reasoning. Well, let's just see if we can do it. We can do it. I don't think there's any way in which they could pick them, but anyway, they are sidestepping issues of principle. A line has been crossed once you want to spy on them. And the committee on which I was a member, in the end, published an editorial in the British Medical Journal a few months ago, which ended in a shamefully collusive way, and I openly dissented as a member of the committee from this majority report. It said, we need to create more trust and support for Prevent. This is straight collusion. This is collusion. I'm sorry, there's no getting away from it. In the last few years, it's not clear just how many referrals to Prevent to date have come from the NHS. Certainly one sample a year ago, I was given a figure of 200. I'm sure there are many more than that. So that's the one domain, medical ethics. What are doctors doing? The other is civil liberties. The doctor's citizen and all of us are citizens. Amnesty International said a few weeks ago, quote, UK has one of the broadest regimes for mass surveillance in the world. Last year, I spoke at a CAGE conference that was held in London, and Garrett Pierce, the human rights lawyer, stated, I quote, in this country has a human rights emergency going on just under the surface. This is McCarthyism. This is McCarthyism, and is part of the increasing toxicity with which things are proceeding at the level of governance in this country. What is terrorism? What is radicalization? Are they pure essences floating up there? Where do they come from? Where do they come from? These perpetrators, and I deplore them, for those actions have consistently, since 9/11, pointed to Western actions in the Middle East and the impunity with which countries like the US, UK and Israel have weighed their interests on the scale of things. 1.3 million people at least have died since we invaded Iraq. Is that terrorism? You know, the whole thing is grotesque actually from beginning to end. We comprise most of the terrorists. Most of the terroristic violence is committed by state actors, Western state actors in the Middle East, if we're talking about the Middle East. How do we feel about that? Do we have some involved? Is that not connected to this issue in some way? The toxic effect on Muslim communities, insecurity, distancing, self-censorship, a sense of suspicion, the idea that they have to be divided into good Muslims and bad Muslims. I think that one of the deeper effects of Prevent is a deeply self-serving attempt to somehow objectify Muslim culture and religion as carrying inherent explanations for terrorism. And this is a disgrace. And maybe, I think in a way, I don't know whether government ratings are going to catch people via reportage by doctors, but I think this is part of the sense of a general surveillance and a hemming in on the Muslim community. They have been identified as the problem community in this country. We've had other problem communities. The Irish at one time, Irish of UK were a problem community. The miners were once a problem community. Now it is the Muslims. And this debate goes on unconnected with British policies in the Middle East. We've been selling arms to Saudi Arabia. They've killed 10,000 people with our collusion, with our arms and with our agreement, and have caused a famine for 40% of the population of the country. Now, I'm sorry, but I call that terrorism. Yeah? In the academic world, there's widespread unease about this. Never mind this publication. There have been a series of publications or letters in The Guardian and other newspapers. One of them was Chomsky and about 150 other largely UK academics comprehensively rejecting this, the way that this report rejects it. What does that mean to us? So to finish, these are the 7, I think, executive summary points. And anybody would like, I've got a web link to this, you don't have to buy the book, I can send it to anyone who approaches me. These are the reasons why they have 100% rejected it. I don't believe there should be any engagement with Prevent. No. And this is what they are. First, the current Prevent strategy suffers from multiple mutually reinforcing structural flaws, the foreseeable consequence of which is a serious risk of human rights violations. Second, Prevent's overly broad and vague definition of non-violent extremism creates the potential for systematic human rights abuses. Thirdly, Prevent duty creates a risk of discrimination, particularly against Muslims, as we know. It may violate the Education Act and Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Fourthly, by requiring the identification and reporting of individuals at risk of violence and so-called non-violent extremism, Prevent creates a risk of violence violation to the right of privacy. These case studies, and they have many wonderful case studies in here, raise troubling questions about the way that Muslim children and others have been targeted in this respect. Fifthly, there are serious concerns about the treatment of children under Prevent. It's referred to as a form of safeguarding, but I think its underlying purpose is something quite different. And we have to remember that we have obligations under Article 3 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Sixthly, second last, Prevent duty risk breaching health bodies' duty of confidentiality, I refer to that way, towards their patients and undermining the relationship between health professionals and their patients. You can see the case studies in here. Finally, the Open Society Foundation concluded on the basis, this was based on 100+ interviews in this country for people across the education and health sectors. Finally, there are serious indications that Prevent is counterproductive. Case studies show that being wrongly targeted under Prevent has led many Muslims to question their place in British society. What other adults wrongfully targeted under Prevent have said that had things been different, their experience of Prevent could have drawn them towards terrorism, not away from it. Government data reveals that 80% of all channel referrals were set aside, implying that there were thousands of individuals wrongly referred to channel. Being referred to Prevent channel is not a neutral act. Even those where there's no further action are not left the same as they were before. So, that's what I have to say. No, this is McCarthy and this is disgrace. Thank you.
thanking our panel for sticking so well to time. We started a little bit later than we'd hoped, but thank you so much for being so concise in such little time. We normally have 30 minutes, 4 questions. I noted that there were people standing at the back. There are seats available if they want to come forward and take those seats. Thank you for not disrupting the proceedings, but do please come and take seats if you'd like to. If you're happier to stay at the back, then please do, don't feel compelled. So I'm going to open the floor to questions, and somebody shot their hands up immediately, so on the basis of first come and ladies first, Salma Yusuf.
Hi, we really can ask 2.5 questions, but I'll ask them really quickly.
No, if you ask one please, because it then gets a bit confusing,
Okay,
but I'll come
I'll ask
back to you if I can.
Okay, cool. I'll ask a linked question. It was really good
A
to
link, you can touch them.
It was really good to hear about your engagement with communities, but I think one of the challenges
Is this to Max?
yeah.
You're looking at him?
Yeah, I'm looking at that. But I think there's always a concern that engagement happens on the basis of who government or who practitioners or people who are leading initiatives want to engage with, and who often present a voice which is palatable to hear. And thinking about this sphere, there are organisations who engage with the families of suspects, who engage with people who've entered into the system, who are completely marginalised, and there's sort of a guilt by association. So the likes of caged prisoners, the likes of thugs, who have a lot of valid opinions to put forward. So I want your opinion on what your view is on engaging with across the spectrum, including organisations that there's been a witch hunt against. And as part of that, I would also say that there's often a reference to moderate organisations. I think the panel also referred to it, moderate demands, moderate organisations, but I'm not always sure that those organisations represent the community. And sort of linked to that is about...
Okay, we should take that. Thank you, Summer. That's a very valid question, and I think the fact that Max very kindly responded promptly to our request and, as indicated, has got a very open approach, speaks volumes, but I'll let Max speak for himself.
Yeah, I mean, in what I've said, I haven't indicated that I've set any limits on those with whom I'm prepared to engage and to listen to views expressed. When I listed 6 organisations or groups whom I've already engaged with, I suspect that many here could identify within that list of 6, but there's a spectrum within that list. I suspect it would be very difficult to gather in one room representatives of all 6 of those organisations and to find that they're all friends. But they've all found a route to me, and I've listened to all of them. And they include Amrit Singh, who's personally been to see me, and I have a copy of Eroding Trust. So I'm willing to engage with all, I'm willing to listen with them. It doesn't mean that I'm going to share the views of all, but I do just add this, that it shouldn't be thought that by getting me in a room, it's simply the case of forcing me to listen to a diatribe that's unconstructive. I listened to what Derek had to say. I respect his experience as an NHS doctor, but to hear what he's expressed over 10 minutes, quoting directly from the Eroding Trust report which Amrit has written, you would have thought that there should be only one recommendation to government within that report, expressed in a single sentence, namely repeal, prevent. But I've got the report on my laptop in front of me, and that isn't the recommendation that Eroding Trust comes up with. It is true that the first of 8 recommendations on page 7 of the report to the UK government is to repeal the prevent duty with respect to the health and education sectors. And I came here expecting to hear some balanced discussion from the education sector and from the health sector along those lines. What I didn't come here expecting to hear was that there was some McCarthyite witch hunt and knock down the whole policy. That's not what Eroding Trust says. So I don't accept from Derek that Eroding Trust makes the thesis that he's expounded to us. So that's an example of me listening but not sharing views expressed. I beg the question, and all of you can assess this, as to whether what we heard from Derek actually was balanced and actually espouses proper a balanced discussion which everybody, me included, and I've come here to learn, can take away. We shouldn't be brought here to listen to diatribes. We should be brought here to expect and receive balance. That's all I've come for.
Right. In terms of the next question, I'm keeping a track of order of raising hands. So Rayla, and then yourself, and then gentleman there, and then we'll come to you. We'll come to you after. If people can keep their questions short and address it specifically if they wish to.
This is a question again for Max Hill. You speak about being independent, you speak about being independent.
Yeah.
Yet you've said that these two practitioners, and they are practitioners in the field, that they may not have been a balanced view.
No, I haven't said that. I haven't said that. I've said, I've drawn a distinction between what didn't sound to me very balanced at all from one of the two speakers to my left, but I didn't say that in respect of the other speaker, who it seemed to me expressed a very balanced view, applying his experience. I am not a health sector professional, nor am I an educator. When we have one of each, you would expect a balanced, mature appraisal from both. Otherwise, how are people like me to assess it? So I'm saying there is a problem when you have a speaker who is the sole representative from one sector who doesn't bring that balance to bear. I am not here to say I'm not prepared to listen. I could very easily have said there's someone from the health sector, doesn't look like they have a very balanced view, I'm not going to turn up. That hasn't been my reaction this evening.
Okay, well they're practitioners and they have a right to their own opinion.
Absolutely.
But yet you have an assistant called Hashim Hamid,
Yeah.
who has clearly said that he agrees with the prevent stance and he doesn't agree with any rejection of it.
I don't understand the question. What's the question?
I think perhaps views are always going to be subjective, and one of the things with communications is people can have their perceptions of it. So I think we're going to go down a rabbit hole. So what I'm going to do is, I did say to you, young man, second to the everybody looks young these days. Yeah, the question is it specifically to anyone?
No, I'm going to invite a response from each of the panelists.
Please stand up so they can see.
Well, young man, so I'll stand up. Good evening. Thank you very much for holding the event, first of all. Prevent, in its current incarnation, is evolved from Tony Blair's PVE. This was the man that, the question is coming, who took us to war in Iraq to protect us in this country, and of course all of us want to be protected. The sad and tragic truth is he did not protect the people of the countries, nor have we been protected in this country. Protect, pursue and prepare, the other three strands of contest, are directed at murder and criminal activity, i.e. terrorism. Conflating this with those three, in my opinion, has made all of us more at risk. I'll give you one example. I'm a lawyer and I've been advising in respect of Prevent for a number of years. There was a case in London, I'll anonymise it. The so-called criminal Islamic State, when it came into being, a Muslim child did a presentation in his school telling the pupils about Islam and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon his state in Medina. I've seen the internal emails. Everybody was very happy. They said, thank you very much. You've drawn a clear distinction, a line in the sand between what we don't want and what Islam is. Within days, the anti-terrorism command was involved. This child was interviewed by anti-terrorism police. He's now in the National Intelligence Database. He was a teenager. And the trigger for intervention is the definition of extremism. Question to the panel, is the definition of extremism the new definition of heresy? Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the definition of terrorism is
No,
not...
extremism.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. The definition of extremism is something that has often been defined very badly, as you, I'm sure, are aware.
There's only one definition.
Well, there is the definition that says if you, for example, the Education Secretary we heard had her own definition, saying that if you, for example, were against gay marriage, that somehow you were an extremist, or words to that effect. And it's going to always be difficult to define. For example, people say if you are against the rule of law and that you're not respecting judges of this country, then you are somebody who might be prone to extremism. Well, if that was the definition we were going to go down, then there are a lot of people who, of the Brexiteers ilk, who were making a lot of bad comments about our Supreme Court judges. They would fall into that category, for example. So, I mean, I just think we have to be careful and cool down the temperature when it comes to this issue. And we have to cool down the temperature of what we're trying to achieve here. There is, I believe, a legitimate question to be asked about whether or not you are conflating conservative values with extremism, for example. There are legitimate questions to be asked about the climate that you create in the education and health sector in relation to prevent, and whether it's actually serving a purpose. And there is a legitimate question to be asked as to whether or not you are turning police officers and teachers into something that they are not meant to be. But we all must be able to sit here and talk to each other and at least understand and aim towards saying there is a legitimate process by which we're trying to do what we're doing. Interestingly, for example, you will never often hear people complain about pursuit. Prevent is something that everybody talks about, and pursuit is what a lot of the security services are involved in, and you won't hear that much. You hear some people, of course, complain about pursuit, but you won't hear the kind of problem that because people know that the government is doing a job to try and protect people, and pursuit is one of those strands. And so that's why I think that the conversations that we need to have about this issue of prevent has to be legitimate. Now, the only thing I would also add to that, what Derek says and what a lot of people say, is, well, foreign policy is the root of all of what we're facing today. People say foreign policy is the reason why we have the problems that we have and that has brought us here. Well, as far as I'm concerned, if you shut that out and you say that's not a conversation to be had, then that's also not going to work. The Prevent group in Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea, for example, have a clear, candid, open conversation about foreign policy and its effects on what's happening on the ground. But if you sweep that under the carpet, then you're not going to have a legitimate conversation. But equally, what you're not going to get, I disagree with Eric, is a question of McCarthyism and a witch hunting. He's entitled to his view, and he's expressed it very forthrightly. But that's just a question of balance and understanding. And that's just my view. You might disagree with it, it might not answer your question.
Is it heresy? You haven't answered
Well,
the question.
I don't have the knowledge to be able to tell you what heresy means and what it was applied as in the 19th and 18th century. Maybe you've written a book about it, I haven't.
It means censorship, that's what it means.
I don't feel censored.
Demonization.
Okay, so if we can go to the gentleman right at the back. I think we've got to, I'm very mindful of the fact that we haven't got very much time, so unless Derek or Kevin specifically want to respond.
I was just going to make the point that definitions, that extremism's in the eye of the beholder, it seems to me. And the point that you made, I think, is extremely apposite, that Nicky Morgan at one stage said that opposition to gay marriage was a sign of extremism. She herself voted against gay marriage in the House of Commons before she changed her mind over it. And I mean, I spoke at a very big meeting in Birmingham during the Trojan Horse episode, and was aware then that a report done of a school in Bradford, it was also caught up in the Trojan Horse, where the BBC ran a story saying that this school had segregated the children by sex, by gender, for sex education lessons. And this was run on, I saw the BBC report about this school in Bradford, and it was somehow making out that this was because of Muslim influence in the school. But every school segregates boys and girls for sex education, at least for some of them. And so the story existing is a bit odd and tells you it's something wrong with the climate that we're in.
So the gentleman's now resorted to standing up.
My name is Abdullah Khan. Can you hear me?
Raise it a bit more,
My name
please.
is Abdullah Khan. I'm actually the chair of Muslim Engineers Network, one of the organizers of this event. Thank you very much to all of the panelists. It was a wonderful event so far, anyway. I've got a very brief question, which is, I mean, at least from Derek and Kevin, there seems to be a consensus, if I've understood correctly, that this is spying in the name of safeguarding Britain. This is spying on Muslims in the name of safeguarding Britain. My question is, why would the government want to spy on Muslims? There are approximately 3 million Muslims in this country, approximately. Why would the government want to spy on them? And just as an allusion to that, Trump has proposed a registry of Muslims in America. To me, I find it really hard to distinguish what the British government has done in the form of prevent. They have effectively put the 3 million Muslims on a registry without actually creating one. So if you can also, Max, please clarify that literally the Muslim community has a consensus that they feel that they're being spied on and they are on a virtual registry that doesn't exist. But in reality, in our heads, it does exist.
Yeah.
So if you can clarify and please make your comments on that, I would be great. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure what clarification I can give you in specific answer to that question. Let me try to make sure that we're inclusive of all the speakers here. What I've said already, and I repeat, is that we have been drawing our focus on two particular areas in which the prevent duty has an impact, and they are education and health. What Kevin has said to us is not that there is no duty with respect to education and children in schools. What he said, his final observation, is that the current prevent policy should be removed and replaced with a safeguarding duty. I thought that was very interesting. It's not for me to say that's right or that is wrong, but it looked to me as though that was driving the conversation to put it this way, the question of whether it's about relabeling and giving new direction to prevent, or whether it's about scrapping it in its entirety. But, and Kevin can speak for himself, he didn't appear to be saying that there isn't a problem to be dealt with, it's about the way in which it's managed. Now, contrast that with health, and Derek's sitting very politely and silently, but I wish he wouldn't. I'd like to hear more from him. What he said is that it is spying, it is collusion, it must be scrapped. So that appears to be something very different to Kevin's approach, which is replaced with a safeguarding duty. What I'd like to learn in the health sector, and Derek's the expert here, is if prevent is wrong, then to what extent is there a need for assisting those who otherwise are not safeguarded and who do find themselves into terrorism? And we do need to just add a fact or two here. I don't have the statistics, but it is a fact that several lone actors, which is the government's favoured term, who have been drawn into terrorism, have committed offences, have significant mental disorders on analysis once they come into the criminal justice system. Take the example of the individual who detonated a small device, I think in a restaurant in Exeter just a few years ago, and whose mother said when he was sentenced in court, it's not actually his fault. I think he was on the spectrum, I think he was an Asperger's sufferer. It's the fault of those who radicalised him. So I would have thought, approaching the health sector this evening, that there is a need for effective safeguarding for those who are otherwise vulnerable by reason of their mental health. That's the guidance that I'd be looking to people like Derek to provide, and I hope we'll be able to do that. How do we do it?
Over to you, Derek.
From time to time in ordinary medical practice and in psychiatric practice, you might encounter a patient who's disturbed and where there may well be a risk of violence or whatever. There are ordinary procedures within the health service that have always dealt with this. If necessary, the Mental Health Act and various other forensic means by which these people are, these things are, where it is issues of risk and safeguarding in the ordinary sense. But that's just a piece of health work. Once you're reporting someone to a spy agency, it is utterly different. The forensic psychiatrists who might have people who they're worried about had perfectly ordinary means before and have done all these decades to handle that and to assess the issue of risk, and if necessary to put someone under the Mental Health Act in hospital for further assessment. They didn't need a program run by a spy agency. That's the difference.
Moving on, sorry, I did say to you, and then to this lovely lady at the front who's been waiting patiently, mindful of time, if we can keep our questions concise, and if they're to anybody, if particularly, please identify.
So is it?
Yes.
Great, thank you everyone. Hello, I'm David. I'm part of the infamous Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington Chelsea Prevent team. I'm speaking here very much as a practitioner rather than from a kind of strategic level. But basically, the key point I wanted to make and the key question I wanted to ask is we've had a very dire picture of the Prevent strategy painted here, one which I personally don't recognise in terms of my experience of delivering it, definitely a very dire picture. And the thing I've noticed is that oftentimes people who paint this very dire picture of Prevent aren't able to answer one question, and that question is, what is the alternative? Now, my sort of attempt at an answer to that question is engage. Engage with us, talk to us. And there are two key reasons why that's so important. The first is because the Prevent strategy is delivered locally. It's a flexible strategy. If you engage with the Prevent strategy, you can mould how it's delivered, you can change it, and that's exactly what we've been doing locally. The second key reason is that there is a lot of misinformation out there, and actually talking to practitioners is a really important way for you yourself to make an informed decision based on all the available information. And just to give a few quick examples based simply on the hour or so we've just heard, Prevent is not run by MI5. I'm absolutely not an MI5 agent. I don't even have security clearance. There is no list. There is no registry. We do a huge amount of work around the far right. That's actually my area of expertise. The support we offer is voluntary, and there are accredited trainers. So all I would simply say is, make up your own mind, but do so by talking to the people who are involved in the actual delivery of Prevent. Thank you.
But the only thing I would add to that, though, is that your experience of what's happening on the ground isn't what's happening in the rest of the country.
Yeah.
And that's quite important to point out. And I say that fairly because, as I pointed out, with what you guys are doing is actually extraordinary and good and needed. But go to Leicester, go to Manchester, go to other places around London, and that is not the experience that I see personally.
But there's something that can be followed up in terms of good practice, and how that can perhaps be taken on board and perhaps progressed even more in other parts of the country. And as I said, we want there to be some legacy from this evening, and that's one of the points that we will take on board.
They have a
my
meeting
colleague is
the
making
first
a
or
mental
the
note.
final Thursday of the month, which is it? You can go along. First Thursday of every month they have a meeting.
Yes, and it's about connecting those examples of good practice with other parts of the country, Leicester, Bradford, etc., and so that there's more consistency, and you don't have extreme examples. So
Can I also, I pointed out another positive example in Tower Hamlets where I think the work is quite good. But there are also many other bad examples. The 14-year-old boy in Islington who had a very good French pronunciation of eco-terrorism in a French lesson, where his teacher held him behind class because they wanted to have a discussion about, and held him in a way that he found very upsetting. The other child who said cucumber, and the teacher thought, he said, how you can think it says cooker bomb, but then that gets reported. This is not, and this isn't necessarily a Prevent referral, but there is the climate is something we have to deal with. We have to get to the position where we are motivated by love for one another and are opening up and not thinking that a mishearing of cucumber is something that gets reported.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I like that, love for one another. I did promise you.
Yeah. I'd like our eminent psychiatrist here to prove to everybody here with maybe some empirical evidence and to prove the illnesses that he's encountered in the Muslim community and their friends.
Right, that would be really lovely if we had 2 hours to do that.
Because you
I know Derek has got a raft of empirical data, and what we'll do is we'll set up something that's got links to it, because all knowledge can be useful,
because
and that's fine. We don't have time to do that right now.
also, we should respect him as an eminent psychiatrist, including the British government, and they should listen to him because he
How much
can
are you paying?
prevent. He can prevent people becoming mentally ill.
I think Derek's credentials speak for themselves over a very long period of time. I'm going to just slightly jump out of order. It is coming up to, we're 2 minutes away from 8:30. If the panellists don't mind, I'll just stretch it by another 5 minutes. But if we can be quick, we've got a visitor from the US, so I'm going to just, if he's got a quick question.
So, I'm Mohammed El-Biari from the US. In 2008, my government pushed me to sit down with your Prevent and Channel people, and ended up later helping my government craft countering violent extremism as a strategy across the pond. So I'm here in the UK to obviously learn from you guys what new ideas are bubbling up that we might import again. Now, my question to you is, a lot of the points that you guys raised about education or the health system, there's concern about those being the channels or the points of referral. In the US, we ran into this problem with the US Attorney's offices being designated. So I was just wanting to know if you had any alternatives in your structure here in the UK that you would prefer for these kind of soft intervention voluntary operations channel to be diverted towards, as opposed to the education or healthcare system.
The number one thing I would say is the more decentralized, the better. That's the number one thing. The further away you get it from the Home Office and the central government to the local level, the better. That's my own personal motivation.
Okay, I'm going to go to this young lady because she's smiling very sweetly. Yes, keep it brief if you can.
Yes, so on a slightly different note, so similar to the prevent duty that requires public authorities to have due regard to fulfil it, and indeed overfulfill it in some cases, as Kevin highlighted. There's also the public sector equality duty, which requires public authorities to have due regard to eliminate unlawful discrimination. And why is it that most teachers don't even know that they have this duty, let alone fulfill it, especially in this context where the prevent duty leads to discriminatory outcomes in terms of proportionality of people referred.
Right, okay, I think that's a comment rather than a question. And
No,
again,
it's a
something,
question.
well,
Question.
okay, I'm going to let Kevin say something to that.
Both duties exist, and you're right, one of them feels like it's being pushed harder than the other. There's a training regime around one. There isn't a training regime around the other. There are teams set up in local authorities around one. There aren't teams set up in local authorities about the other. So I think you're just getting a message, and schools are getting a message about what
As minority communities are getting a message.
and therefore minority communities get a message from that as well. So that's why we have recently done a survey with the Runnymede Trust about the experience of black and minority ethnic teachers in our schools, and that reveals some good practice and a lot of bad practice. And certainly I think that the government should be, the thing that you say about if the police are going to do their work, they need to have the trust of the community. For me, that would mean that a government would have to be pushing really hard on removing Islamophobia, removing anti-racism, and we have to be doing that to build the trust, so that people would. I mean, there are things that need to be reported. Those 3 young women from a school in Bethnal Green to Syria, and that's a terrible thing to happen. Nobody in school knew about it. There were 3 high-achieving GCSE students, so nothing from Prevent would have got to them. But it's a terrible thing that happened. So it would have been good if somebody had stopped them doing that.